Your fans are so in love with you. When people heard you're coming on the show finally, because your fans have been since episode 1 talking about you being on the show, and we're 5 years later, finally you're on the show, which is great. But they can't shut up about you. So why do people get so obsessive with you, do you think?
Well, I should, in fairness, point out that I think...
Or the concept?
I think I have a very polarizing effect on people. So I either have fans who like my stuff, or I have people who think I have the most punchable face in the universe, and I remind them of like the frat boy jock who like slapped their girlfriend's ass in college, or I don't know what it is, even though that I was neither of those. But for whatever reason, I get the sort of very positive or very negative effect from people, which I'm fine with because I don't want to end up in the middle. But I think that I really try to be what you see is what you get. And I don't think that you've spent time with me socially.
Yeah.
I like how I am now is how I am when we're hanging out.
It's very authentic.
In person. And I try to be very open about my mistakes and my disasters. And it's like, oh yeah, we're coming to the experiments, like that idea to fly in stem cell growth factor from Israel to inject up and down my spine with like a black market chemist. Maybe not the best idea.
Whoa. Did you actually attempt that?
Yeah, I did. And I guess attempt is probably a good word for it because I had, in that same session, I broke the record for clinic injections. And this was with a very questionable guy who will remain unnamed, but who works with a lot of athletes who are taking, we'll call them extra supplementation for their performances. And I had a number of injuries I wanted his help fixing. And so I did have stem cell growth factor, IGF-1, growth hormone, a bunch of things turned into a cocktail and injected in different sites in my body. I had some tennis elbow, and at that point we did something called PRP, which is very interesting. It's platelet-rich plasma. So you take out a whole blood sample, in effect.
When was this, by the way?
This was probably 2008, 2009. I've done some stuff since then, but that was then.
Because this is something that Kobe Bryant has since done, the platelet thing.
Oh, yeah.
On his knee.
Absolutely. And I did PRP even prior to that. So, so the good news about being an early adopter with these weird edge cases in professional sports is you get to see things before other people. The bad news is that sometimes that means you're taking the arrows on the front lines and being the human guinea pig who creates the list of known side effects include, you're the guy who's like, oh, my liver hurts and my eyes are yellow. They're like, all right, let's note those two down.
So wait, the guy comes and he's got this cocktail of your platelet-rich blood.
Right, and they put that exactly. So they spin it out, and then they re-inject those growth factors into the site of injury to, among other things, sort of mimic an acute injury. So to marshal the body's resources and this injection to repair the site. The problem is they botched that injection, and they did it through a thicker area of skin on the elbow than they should have. Why is that important? Well, the reason it's important is that if you use alcohol or betadine or whatever to disinfect the surface of the skin, great, but if you push the needle through 5 layers of skin or very thick skin, then you can push bacteria from those internal layers into the joint capsule, which is exactly what happened. So I got a staph bacteria infection on my elbow, which became about as large as a football. Had to go to the emergency room. The guy who took fluid out of my elbow. I mean, people in the ER are supposed to be very clinical and literal and Spock-like. And he goes, holy shit. Like they taught us in medical school that 30 cc's was the limit. We're taking 50 plus cc's out of here. What did you do to your elbow? And he just totally lost his composure, which I thought was hilarious.
So what happened to the tennis elbow?
The tennis elbow turned into a bigger problem than it was because I had I had to have surgery and get it cleaned out and blah, blah, blah. And
you can die from septic shock. I mean, if that bacteria got into your blood, if I
had waited a week, I could have had a systemic staph infection or an unusable elbow. Right. So the point is, let me do these experiments for you and then report back and tell you how to dial it down maybe 40% and what works and what doesn't.
And that is super compelling in reading and making.
But PRP is something that's become much more mainstream. And I mean, there are things that I wrote about.
It's legal now. It came out of Germany.
Yeah,
and every NBA player is doing it every offseason.
Yeah, there are some pretty amazing effects that can be gotten from it, and a lot of the things that were written about in the 4 Hour Body, that was published in 2010 but written in 2008, 2009, are now becoming mainstream. So Gretchen Reynolds in the New York Times is talking about cold exposure and fat loss and adiponectin and all these things, or the microbiome and how things like Splenda can completely screw up your intestinal gut flora.
I saw you talking about these things, and it turns out also you were right that these artificial sweeteners make you fat because they spike your insulin, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, just because it's non-caloric doesn't mean that it won't have an effect on your pancreas or on your microbiome. And what's amazing is you can take, whether it's fecal transplants or otherwise, you can take these sort of destroyed intestinal microbiomes, transplant them to someone else, and they'll develop glucose intolerance. It's amazing. So I'm actually thinking I'm thinking about doing of receiving a fecal transplant, like trying to identify like the Michael Jordan of microbiomes.
This might be the first time somebody said they were going to receive a fecal transplant on the show.
I'm quite sure that's very likely.